Snow fell in sheets across the Montana prairie. Samuel Hartwell stood at his window watching it bury the world, the way grief had buried him 3 winters past. Behind him, his daughter Willa May set the table for 2. The same ritual, the same silence. Then came the knock. Samuel's hand stilled on the curtain. Nobody traveled in weather like this. Nobody came to his door anymore, not since Sarah died. Not since he'd made it clear he wanted to be left alone with his grief and his daughter. The knock came again, firm, desperate. He opened the door to find Grace Porter holding the hands of 2 small children. Her face showed exhaustion carved deep, pride fighting with fear. Behind them, footprints in fresh snow led from town. No wagon, no horse. Just tracks already disappearing under new fall. "Mr. Hartwell," she said, voice steady despite the trembling in her shoulders. "I apologize for the intrusion. We have nowhere else." Samuel recognized her from church, always alone in the back pew, always quiet, always leaving before anyone could speak to her. A widow. He'd heard. Recent. His instinct said close the door. Protect what little peace remained. Keep the world and its complications outside where they belonged. "Papa." Willa May appeared beside him, eyes wide. "It's Christmas Eve." The little girl in Grace's arms couldn't have been more than 3. The boy, maybe 5, stared up at Samuel with hollow eyes that had seen too much winter already. Samuel stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "Get warm." Grace hesitated, pride warring with necessity in her expression, then crossed the threshold. The children stumbled in behind her, snow falling from their thin coats onto his floor. Samuel closed the door. The wind howled outside, angry at being denied entrance. "Just for tonight," Grace said quickly. "We'll leave at first light. I promise we won't." "Storm's getting worse." Samuel moved to add wood to the fire. "We'll talk about tomorrow when it comes." Willa May was already pulling the children toward the hearth, her natural instinct to help overriding any shyness. She offered the little girl her cornhusk doll without prompting. "This is Rosie," the doll maker said solemnly. "She keeps you safe at night." The child took it with reverent hands. Grace's eyes filled. She turned away quickly, pretending to remove her damp shawl. Samuel watched his daughter with the strangers and felt something shift in the cabin's air warmth pushing back against years of accumulated cold. The space felt different with 5 people instead of 2. Fuller. Almost alive. He realized with sudden certainty he'd just changed everything. "There's soup," he said. "Not much, but it's hot." Grace nodded, not trusting her voice. Outside. The snow fell harder. Christmas Eve descended into darkness, and in Samuel Hartwell's cabin, for the first time in 3 years, something besides grief took up residence. Samuel woke to sounds he'd forgotten existed. A woman humming, children's whispered laughter, the sizzle of eggs in a cast-iron pan. For one confused moment, still half in dreams, he thought Sarah had returned from wherever death took people. Then memory crushed hope. He dressed quickly and emerged to find Grace at his stove, moving through his kitchen with quiet efficiency. She'd found his eggs, his bacon, the coffee he kept for Sunday mornings. Steam rose from the pot like small prayers. "I hope you don't mind," she said without turning. "I'm not accustomed to idleness." "It's fine." Samuel's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat. "More than fine." Outside, through the frosted window, he could see Willa May showing Tommy how to scatter feed for the chickens. The boy listened with intense concentration, as if this simple task mattered more than anything in his young life. Little Rosie sat by the fire-building towers from wooden blocks Samuel had carved for Willa May years ago. She hummed the same tune her mother had been humming. The sound wrapped around the cabin like a warm blanket. Grace poured coffee and set it before Samuel. Their hands didn't touch, but he felt the nearness of another adult like heat from a stove. "I owe you an explanation," she said, sitting across from him. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." She wrapped both hands around her own cup, My husband died 6 months ago. Cholera. We lived in Wyoming. He had a claim there, a small cabin. After he passed, his brother wrote saying there was land here in Montana. Family land. Said we could settle it. Make something. Her voice stayed level. Factual. Samuel recognized the tone, the way you spoke of unbearable things when you'd run out of tears. I came west with what little we had, but when I arrived, the claim was abandoned. No house, no family. Just prairie and promises that turned out to be lies. The brother moved on 2 years ago. Nobody knew where. She met his eyes. I made poor choices, Mr. Hartwell. Trusted the wrong words, but my children shouldn't pay for my mistakes. Samuel thought about his own years of mistakes. The way he'd let grief turn him into a ghost. The way Willa May had learned to be too quiet, too careful, afraid of disturbing the sorrow that filled every room. We've all made poor choices, he said. The children burst through the door, cold air rushing in with them. Their cheeks burned red, eyes bright with the simple pleasure of morning tasks completed. Papa. Willa May's voice carried more life than Samuel had heard in months. Tommy helped me carry water without spilling any. The boy beamed with pride. Can they stay for Christmas dinner? Willa May asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Grace tensed, ready for refusal. Ready to gather her children and leave despite the snow and nowhere to go. Samuel looked at the 4 of them, his daughter alive again. These strangers who somehow didn't feel strange at all. Christmas dinner, he agreed. Then we see what the weather does. Grace's shoulders dropped. Relief, gratitude, something deeper he couldn't name. That afternoon, while the children played and Grace mended their worn clothes by the fire, Samuel stood at his workbench pretending to sharpen tools he'd sharpened yesterday. But he was watching them, watching his house fill with sound and presence, watching Willa May teach Rosie a clapping game, watching Tommy carefully stack firewood the way Samuel had shown him. Something had changed overnight, not just in his cabin, but deeper in the hollow place where his heart had been. The thought terrified him almost as much as it gave him hope. The church went silent when Samuel walked in with all 4 of them. Christmas morning service. The small frontier chapel packed with familiar faces, neighbors, customers, people Samuel had known for a decade. Grace walked beside him, children between them. Willa May holding Tommy's hand like a protective older sister. Every head turned. You could hear the collective intake of breath. Feel the judgment forming in the cold air. Samuel guided them to his usual pew front row, where everyone could see, where there was no pretending, no hiding, if this was going to be a scandal. Better to face it head on. Pastor Reynolds stumbled over his greeting. The organist hit 2 wrong notes. Women leaned toward each other, whispering behind gloved hands. Men's faces hardened into familiar frontier disapproval. The sermon felt longer than usual. Pointed. When the pastor spoke about propriety, about maintaining Christian standards, about how actions spoke louder than words, Samuel felt every eye on the back of his neck. After the service, on the church steps, Ruth Barrett intercepted him. Samuel. Her voice carried the weight of social authority she'd wielded for 20 years. Might I have a word? Grace took the children toward the wagon. She knew what was coming. People are talking, Ruth said without preamble. A widow and widower under one roof. It's been 2 days, but still, it doesn't look proper. It's Christian charity, Samuel replied evenly. On Christmas? I'm sure your intentions are good. Ruth's smile didn't reach her eyes. But you know how people talk in a small town. Think of Willa May. Think of your reputation. That woman may be perfectly respectable, but appearances matter. Are you saying I should have left them in the snow? Of course not. But there's a boarding house in Silverton. Perhaps help her find work there. A proper arrangement. Samuel felt anger rising hot and unexpected after 3 years of feeling almost nothing. I appreciate your concern, Ruth, but I'll handle my own household. He walked away before she could respond. On the ride home, Grace sat rigid beside him. The children huddled in the wagon bed under blankets, too young to understand but old enough to sense tension. I heard what she said. Grace spoke quietly. Every word. Samuel said nothing. I'll leave after the storm passes. Tomorrow. Maybe. I won't destroy your standing here. And go where? Somewhere. Anywhere. I've managed this far. The wagon wheels crunched through snow. The horse's breath steamed in cold air. Samuel thought about his empty cabin, about years of silence stretching ahead like frozen prairie. Stay, he said. Grace turned sharply. What? Stay. Through winter, at least. It's the Christian thing to do. Whatever Ruth Barrett thinks about it. Samuel. It's Mr. Hartwell to most folk, but you can call me Samuel. He kept his eyes on the road. You need somewhere safe. The children need warmth and food. Willa May needs... She needs what you've given her these past 2 days. What have I given her? Life, Samuel said simply. The cabin's been a tomb since Sarah died. You brought it back. Grace studied his profile, the lines grief had carved. The jaw set with determination she was beginning to recognize. You're sure? I'm sure. That evening, after the children slept, Samuel stood on his porch smoking his pipe. The sky had cleared, stars sharp as broken glass against black velvet. Grace found him there. They'll make your life difficult, she said. The town... They already do. Been a ghost for 3 years. Folks don't know what to do with grief they can't fix. This is different. This is scandal. Samuel knocked ash from his pipe. Let them talk. Out here, a closed door on Christmas Eve is a sin the devil himself wouldn't commit. I opened mine. They can judge me for that if they want. Grace wrapped her shawl tighter against the cold. Inside, through the window, lamplight glowed warm. Their children, she'd already started thinking of them that way, slept peacefully. Thank you, she said. Samuel nodded. Neither of them moved. They stood together in the cold, not touching, watching stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring consequences. Tonight, there was just this 2 broken people trying to protect what was left of hope. The die was cast. There was no going back now. By the 2nd week of January, they'd found a rhythm. Grace mended by firelight while Samuel whittled. The children slept in the small room off the kitchen, their breathing a steady music through thin walls. The silence between the adults was no longer awkward but companionable, almost. Samuel taught Tommy to stack wood, to carry water without spilling, to speak softly around the chickens so they'd lay better. The boy absorbed lessons like parched ground taking rain. He called Samuel Sir with a formality that made Samuel's chest ache. Willa May and Rosie became inseparable, 2 parts of the same small person. They made up games with sticks and stones, shared secrets in whispered conferences, fell asleep holding hands. Grace's presence transformed the cabin in ways Samuel couldn't articulate. Clean curtains appeared on windows. Preserves got organized by type. The woodpile straightened. Small touches that made the space feel less like a place people survived and more like somewhere they lived. But town trips grew tense. At the general store. Conversation stopped when Samuel entered. Women gathered in tight circles, speaking in low tones that carried enough to be heard. When Grace walked past, they physically moved aside, not with violence, but with deliberate distance that said more than words. Warren Kent, who owned the store, served Samuel slowly, made him wait while others were helped first. Never overtly rude that wasn't Frontier way, but the message clear you've crossed a line. Floyd Whitlock, Samuel's closest friend, tipped his hat when they passed on the street. But he didn't stop to talk. Didn't invite Samuel for coffee like he used to. Just tipped his hat and kept walking. Apology written in the set of his shoulders. The isolation was strategic, coordinated, brutal in its efficiency. One night, Samuel found Grace crying by the kitchen window. She didn't hear him approach. Her shoulders shook silently. One hand pressed to her mouth to muffle sound. She'd taken off her apron and held it twisted between her hands. "Grace." She straightened quickly, wiping her face. "I'm fine, just tired. Don't lie to me." She turned, eyes red. "I'm destroying your life. Your standing in this town, your business prospects, Willa May's future friendships. Everything you built here. For what? For a woman and 2 children you don't even know." Samuel moved closer. "I know you well enough. Do you know I'm a widow who made foolish choices? Who brought nothing but trouble to your door? Who's costing you everything and can offer nothing in return? You brought my daughter back to life. At what cost?" Samuel wanted to touch her shoulder, offer comfort, but didn't know if that would help or complicate things further. So he just stood there, this careful distance between them that had become familiar. "My reputation was already buried," he said. "Been a ghost for 3 years. The town didn't know what to do with me anymore. Maybe this needed to happen. You're lying to make me feel better. I'm telling truth to make us both stop pretending this doesn't matter." The words hung between them. Both knew they'd just admitted something neither was ready to examine. Grace wiped her face again. "I should go. In spring. When the weather breaks, find work somewhere. Maybe Silverton or Helena. Start fresh where nobody knows us." "Is that what you want?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. From the other room came Rosie's sleepy voice calling for her mother. Grace moved toward the sound, grateful for the interruption. Samuel stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by her touches, the organized shelves, the mended curtains, the clean floor. He thought about spring, about the cabin empty again, about the return of silence. The thought made him physically ill. That night, lying awake, listening to his full house breathe and shift and live, Samuel admitted what he'd been avoiding. He didn't want them to leave. Not in spring. Not ever. The realization terrified him more than anything had in 3 years. Pastor Reynolds preached that Sunday about propriety, about appearances, about how a Christian community maintains moral standing in a lawless territory, about responsibility to set examples. He never said Samuel's name. Didn't need to. Every word aimed like an arrow at the back of Samuel's neck. Grace sat rigid beside him, spine straight, eyes fixed on the pulpit. The children sensed something wrong and stayed unusually still. Even Rosie didn't fidget. After the service, outside in cold sunshine, Clyde Barrett approached, merchant, town council member, man who made opinions into law through sheer force of personality. "Samuel." He nodded to Grace without meeting her eyes. "Mrs. Porter, beautiful service. Wasn't it?" It was something. Samuel agreed. "Might I have a word private like—" Grace took the children toward the wagon. She didn't look back. Clyde waited until they were out of earshot. "Folks are concerned. Samuel, you're a good man, respected. But it's been 6 weeks now with that woman under your roof. Either make your intentions clear or, well, it ain't decent otherwise." "My intentions? Marriage or employment elsewhere. Those are the options that preserve everyone's dignity." Clyde's voice wasn't unkind, which somehow made it worse. "A man and woman can't live together unmarried without raising questions about their character. You understand that?" Samuel understood. He'd been raised with the same rules, the same rigid social codes that governed frontier life. Without them, people said, civilization collapsed into chaos. But suddenly those rules felt hollow. "I appreciate your concern," Samuel said carefully, "but my household is my business. Your household affects the whole community, especially with a young daughter in the mix. Think of Willa May's reputation. Think of her future prospects for a good marriage." That hit harder. Samuel had been thinking of Willa May, how happy she'd been lately, how the shadows had lifted from her eyes. But Clyde was right about consequences. A girl with a scandalous home life would find doors closed later. Suitable young men warned away. her life shaped by her father's choices. I'll consider what you've said. Clyde clapped his shoulder. That's all I ask. You're a good man. Samuel. Don't let misplaced compassion ruin everything you've built. The ride home stretched in uncomfortable silence. At the cabin, Samuel paced the porch while Grace put children down for afternoon rest. The March wind still carried winter's bite, but somewhere underneath lay the promise of spring. Grace found him there, shawl wrapped tight. I know what he said to you. Do you? I've heard the same speech before. Different words, same message. Woman alone is dangerous. Woman with a man who isn't her husband is scandal. Her voice stayed level, but her hands trembled. I'm not naive. Samuel, I know how this looks. I know what they think. What do you think? The question caught her off guard. About what? About us? This? Whatever we're doing here. Grace was quiet for a long moment. I think I'm grateful. I think I'm terrified. I think I don't know what happens next. That makes two of us. They stood side by side, not touching, watching clouds build in the west. Inside, through the window, the children's voices rose in some imaginative game. I could leave. Grace said, take the children. Find work somewhere. It would solve everything. Would it? It would save your reputation. And what would it cost? Samuel turned to face her. Grace, I was breathing before you came. That's not the same as being alive. You showed me the difference. Her eyes filled. Then what are we doing here? What is this? I don't know yet. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. But I know sending you away would hollow me out completely. And I won't do that again. The wind picked up. Grace shivered. We should go inside, Samuel said, but neither of them moved. They stood there in the cold. Two people balanced on the edge of something neither could name, but both were starting to understand. Inside, Willa May whispered to Tommy, don't worry. Papa won't make you leave. I can tell. The children's certainty highlighted the adults' confusion. That night, Grace and Samuel sat at opposite ends of the kitchen table after the children slept. Not speaking, not touching, just existing in the same space, each wrestling with feelings they couldn't yet articulate. The lamp burned low between them. Outside, the first spring rain began to fall. The town meeting wasn't supposed to be about Samuel Hartwell. The agenda said spring planning road repairs, cattle disease prevention, allocation of community resources. Samuel almost didn't attend, but staying away would look like hiding, and he'd never been a man who hid from consequences. So he sat in the back row of the town hall while neighbors discussed mundane matters. Lamplight cast harsh shadows. The room smelled of wood smoke and wet wool. Then Warren Kent stood. Before we adjourn, there's a matter of community standards we need to address. The room's temperature dropped 10 degrees. All eyes shifted to Samuel. His jaw tightened. Here it comes. Samuel Hartwell's been housing a woman and her children for nearly 2 months now. Warren's voice stayed reasonable, measured, which made it more dangerous. No formal arrangement announced. No engagement declared. It's improper. Sets a poor example, especially for our young people who need to understand proper conduct between men and women. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled townspeople. Samuel stayed seated. Staying silent gave them power, but standing might seem defensive. He was trapped either way. Ruth Barrett rose, voice surprisingly emotional. We're not heartless. The situation was complicated. But it's gone on too long. There's a boarding house in Silverton. We'd take up a collection. Help Mrs. Porter resettle properly. Help her find respectable work. It's the decent solution for everyone involved. More nods. The consensus building like a storm. She could work as a seamstress. Someone suggested, or a cook. Respectable positions for a widow. They were discussing Grace like she was a problem to be solved, a complication to be tidily removed so the town could return to comfortable righteousness. Samuel felt anger rising hot and clean after years of feeling nothing but grief's dull ache. He stood. The room fell silent. No. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Warren Kent's eyebrows rose. No. No. Samuel's voice stayed level, but his hands shook. I won't send her away. I won't send those children into uncertainty because you're uncomfortable with kindness that doesn't fit. Your narrow rules. This isn't about kindness, Warren countered. It's about what's proper, what's decent. You're a respected member of this community. Samuel, you're throwing that away for what, say it? For a woman who had nowhere else to go. For 2 children who'd done nothing wrong except be born to hardship. For my daughter, who's been more alive in these 2 months than the 3 years since her mother died. Ruth Barrett's voice sharpened. Think of Willa May's future. Her reputation. Her reputation. Samuel's voice rose. She's 7 years old. And she's learning that mercy matters more than gossip. That's what her mother would have taught her. Clyde Barrett stood. You're choosing to disgrace yourself. Your family name. Everything your father built in this territory. I'm choosing to act like Christ instead of just talking about it on Sundays. Samuel looked around the room. Grace Porter has done nothing wrong. Neither have I. We've given each other what this town wouldn't, basic human decency. If you can't understand that kindness matters more than appearance, that compassion outweighs your comfort, then that's your moral failure, not mine. The room erupted, some in agreement, most in anger. Samuel didn't wait to hear more. He walked out into cold March night, hands shaking so hard he could barely grip the door handle. Behind him, argument exploded into chaos. Someone had ridden ahead Floyd Whitlock, probably, trying to warn her. Grace met Samuel at the cabin door, face pale, eyes wide. What have you done? What I had to. That they'll destroy you, your business, your daughter's future, your place here. I know. Samuel's voice cracked. I know what it costs. Then why? He looked at her, really looked in the lamplight spilling from the doorway. At this woman who'd brought his house back to life, who'd made his daughter laugh again, who'd shown him the difference between existing and living, because losing you costs more. The words hung between them, truth spoken plainly, no more hiding. Grace's eyes filled. She said nothing. Neither of them slept that night. By morning, the consequences would begin. The punishment came swift and thorough. By week's end, Samuel's carpentry customers had vanished. Orders canceled with thin excuses. Decided to wait until summer. Found someone cheaper in Silverton. Changing our plans entirely. The pattern too consistent to be coincidence. At the general store, Warren Kent suddenly couldn't extend Samuel's usual credit. Company policy changed, he said, not meeting Samuel's eyes. Cash only from now on. The blacksmith remembered pressing work elsewhere whenever Samuel appeared. The feed supplier raised prices just for him. Even Floyd Whitlock crossed the street to avoid conversation, guilty conscience written in every step. The isolation was complete, strategic, devastating in its efficiency. Then Willa May came home crying. Samuel heard her before he saw her harsh sobs that tore at his chest. She ran past Grace and into his arms, face buried in his shirt. What happened? Between sobs, they said. The girls at school. They said you and Miss Grace are living in sin, that we're bad, that I can't play with them anymore because she couldn't finish, didn't need to. Samuel held his daughter while rage and helplessness warred in his chest. He'd known there would be consequences, but seeing them land on his child, watching her pay for his choices that cut deeper than any financial hardship. Grace appeared in the doorway, face stricken. I'm so sorry, Samuel shook his head. Not your fault, but they both knew the truth. He'd chosen this. He'd stood in that town meeting and declared his position. Everything that followed was consequence. That evening, he found Grace in the spare room, her belongings neatly bundled. Tommy and Rosie's few possessions packed. "What are you doing?" "I can't watch your child suffer for my presence." Her voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. "I'll find work somewhere. Silverton, maybe Helena. We'll manage somehow." "Grace, please don't make this harder. You've been more than generous, more than kind, but I won't destroy your life for us." Samuel stared at the packed bundles, at the neat efficiency of her departure, at the end of something that had barely begun. The thought of the cabin empty again, the return of silence. The death of possibility was unbearable. "Stay. You saw what they did to Willa May. Stay." He moved closer. "Not as charity anymore. Not as temporary arrangement. Stay because this house died when Sarah did and you brought it back. All of you. Stay because I'm asking you to let us be your family. Because you already are." Grace's composure cracked. "The whole town. The town will heal or it won't." His voice roughened. "But I won't survive losing you now. None of us will. You're asking me to let you sacrifice everything. I'm asking you to let me finally live again instead of just surviving. There's a difference. You taught me that." Tears fell freely now. "What if it doesn't get better? What if they never forgive this? Then we'll have each other. That's more than I've had in 3 years." Grace looked at her packed belongings, at the door leading to the rest of the house where children slept, at Samuel standing in lamplight, offering something neither of them fully understood yet. She didn't unpack immediately, but she didn't leave either. That night, the children pushed their beds together and slept in one pile, choosing proximity over space. Some instinct told them to hold tight to each other. Grace and Samuel sat at the kitchen table until dawn, not speaking much, hands almost touching across worn wood. Outside, the last of winter's harshness began to break through the window. The first robin appeared. Spring was finally coming, and with it, possibility. Spring arrived early that year, as if the land itself had tired of winter's cruelty. Samuel Hartwell brought his household to Easter service. Grace, Tommy, Rosie, Willa May, all of them together, and watched the congregation freeze. Women clutched their husbands' arms. Men's faces hardened. The entire community held its breath. They'd stayed away from church for 5 weeks after the town meeting. Let the dust settle. Let tempers cool. But Easter demanded attendance. It was the day of resurrection. After all, of new beginnings. Samuel guided his family to their usual front pew, right up front where everyone could see, where there was no hiding, no pretending. Gasps and whispers exploded behind them. Pastor Reynolds visibly struggled with whether to address this before his sermon. His eyes met Samuel's, a long look that held question, judgment, something almost like respect. Before the service could begin, Samuel stood. Grace's hand grabbed his sleeve. "Don't do this," but he gently removed it. Stood there in front of God and everyone while the congregation held its collective breath. "I have something to say." His voice carried in the small chapel, steady despite his racing heart. "Grace Porter and her children have lived under my roof for 3 months now. Some of you think that's wrong. By your rules, maybe it is. But by God's measure, the one about mercy, about loving your neighbor, about not abandoning widows and orphans to winter storms, I believe I'm doing exactly right." The silence was absolute. "I didn't ask for your approval when I opened my door on Christmas Eve. I'm not asking for it now. But I am saying this: Grace and her children are my family. However that looks to you. Whatever words you use to describe it, that's what they are. Family." Willa May stood beside him, small but certain. "Papa's right." Her voice barely carried past the first few rows, but in the silence, everyone heard. "Miss Grace is my family. Tommy and Rosie too. If loving them is wrong, then I don't understand God's rules. Because Papa says God is love, and we love each other. So that can't be wrong. The simplicity of her faith cut through adult complexity like a knife. From the back, old Martha Doyle rose, joints creaking, voice strong. The child speaks truth we've been too proud to hear. She looked around at her neighbors. We've been cruel in the name of propriety. Called it righteousness when it was just fear of anything different. Shame on us. Floyd Whitlock stood next. The man opened his home on Christmas Eve to a woman and children with nowhere to go. That's more Christian than anything I've done this year. More than most of us have done ever. One by one, people rose. Not everyone, never everyone. Warren Kent stormed out, face red with anger. Ruth Barrett stayed seated, spine rigid with disapproval. But enough stood. Enough to tip the balance. Young couples with children, old-timers who remembered harder times, people who'd been helped themselves once and remembered the grace of it. Pastor Reynolds stood at his pulpit, tears in his eyes. Perhaps, he said slowly, perhaps we've mistaken tradition for righteousness. Perhaps we've confused propriety with love. He looked directly at Samuel. Mr. Hartwell, Mrs. Porter, I believe this community owes you both an apology, a profound one. Samuel nodded. You owe Grace one, not me. She's the one you judged without knowing. She's the one who survived your cruelty with dignity I can't even fathom. Grace's hand found his, held tight after the service. People approached, awkward apologies, tentative welcomes. Not everyone, but enough. The tide had turned. Floyd Whitlock shook Samuel's hand, eyes wet. You're a better man than most of us. Took real courage to stand alone like that. Samuel looked at Grace, at Willa May, at the children gathered close. I wasn't alone, he said. That's what you all didn't understand. I was never alone. On the wagon ride home, nobody spoke. But Grace's hand stayed in Samuel's, and the children sat close together. Understanding something important had shifted even if they couldn't name it. Spring had finally broken through, and with it, the possibility of forgiveness. 3 months after Easter, Samuel Hartwell stood in his garden watching Grace plant tomato seedlings while 3 children chased. Fireflies through tall grass. The cabin had grown. New room added on the south side. Larger kitchen. A proper table that fit 6 people instead of 2. Samuel had built it himself over April and May, with help from Floyd and a few other men who'd decided forgiveness was more important than pride. His business had slowly recovered. Not everyone returned, but enough. And new customers came from Silverton people who'd heard about the man who stood up to a whole town for what was right. Apparently courage had market value. Grace kept chickens now, sold eggs in town. The women who'd shunned her still kept their distance, mostly, but a few had softened. Martha Doyle visited weekly. Others nodded in passing. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, more like accommodation, an uneasy peace with the idea that love didn't always follow prescribed patterns. Samuel could live with that. You ever think about making it official? Grace asked, not looking up from her planting. Samuel paused, trowel in hand. The house already feels like yours. I meant us. She brushed dirt from her hands, still not meeting his eyes. Oh. They'd danced around this for weeks. Living as family without the formal declaration, content with the reality even if the paperwork lagged behind. When you're ready, Samuel said carefully. No rush, we've got time, Grace smiled. Yeah, time. Willa May appeared, breathless and laughing. Papa. The table's too small again. Tommy's legs don't fit underneath now. And when Martha visits, there's not enough room for everyone. Samuel laughed the deep, genuine sound that had died with Sarah and returned with Grace. Then I guess we're building a bigger table. Can I help? Tommy asked, appearing behind Willa May. Wouldn't do it without you, son. The words slipped out naturally. Son. Tommy's face lit up like sunrise. Dinner that night was chaos. All of them around the too small table, talking over each other, arguing about who got the last biscuit, telling stories about their day. Rosie spilled milk. Willa Mae corrected Tommy's grammar. Grace threatened to make them all eat outside if they didn't calm down. Normal. Beautifully, perfectly normal, after the children went to bed. Samuel and Grace stood together on the porch. Late May evening. Warm, finally. Stars bright overhead. You ever regret it? Grace asked quietly. Taking us in, not once. Even with everything it cost. What it cost was nothing compared to what it gave back. Samuel took her hand. I was dead. Grace. Walking and talking and going through motions. But dead. You brought me back to life. All of you. She leaned against his shoulder. The land teaches you, she said. What you plant in faith, you harvest in joy. Same goes for family. Old saying. My grandmother's. She was right about most things. Later. Samuel stood at his threshold looking in. Lamplight spilling gold across floorboards. Grace reading to sleepy children by the fire. Willa Mae's head on her shoulder. The small ones already dozing. Tomorrow he'd start that bigger table. Next week. Grace had mentioned planting roses by the porch. Eventually, when she was ready. There would probably be a wedding. Simple ceremony. Nothing fancy. Just making official what their hearts already knew. But tonight, this was enough. 2 lamps burning in the window. A door left unlocked for friends who'd become family again. A house full of breath and warmth and laughter. A family chosen. Fought for. Earned through courage beginning again. The snow had melted months ago. Spring had come and settled into summer. And Samuel Hartwell, who'd thought his heart died 3 winters past, discovered it had only been waiting. Waiting for a knock on Christmas Eve, waiting for strangers to become home. He turned off the porch lamp and went inside. His family was waiting.